All right, so let's begin the last micro lesson, 4.3. How do we manage the environment? How do we manage the flexible course content? And so in this micro lesson, we will take a look at how we make content reusable and accessible. We'll talk about accessibility in more depth as well. And I know it was one of the first questions before we began today from Lalita, so I know it's on everybody's mind. Also, earlier, and we saw in the quiz or the survey that a lot of you are interested in what are some lecture delivery strategies that increase flexibility for students. So we'll talk about that. And again, we want to make sure we're doing this because we want to make sure everyone can use our course materials regardless of time, place, or diverse ability. And so we'll explore and discuss a few strategies. We'll complete some activities. We'll have a laugh. It'll be good. So, reusable content. So in the last micro lesson, we talked a little bit about, or it might have been the first one, how we can create alternate versions of our content. So this is a slightly different take on it. And again, whether you're a fan of sustainability, reduce, reuse, recycle, or you want to maintain your sanity, reusable content is the way to go. So as you plan or create content for your class, think through how one item or one version can support students in multiple environments. In module 2, we explored strategies like a library of reusable feedback comments for your assessment when you're giving feedback to students on problem sets in a STEM discipline, on essays or writing samples in humanities, reusing help snippets from your syllabus to provide just-in-time support in the instructions for an activity. So we're already in that reuse mode. So here are some strategies for creating content that you can reuse or finding content that you can reuse. One, we're doing it right now. I'm delivering a live lecture and I'm recording it. So we're reusing this artifact as something that you can review and something that students who, learners, participants who are joining us on their own time can review as well. So, and if you are one of those people, we are so glad that you took the time to check out micro lesson 4.3. Keep going. Some video conference tools have settings that allow you to automatically record each session to the cloud, and then you can just share a link to the video that may already have an auto transcript and a follow-up message to the class, or you can do what I've been doing with the help of the amazing Shady Ruiz, downloading them, putting them into YouTube, and then embedding that in the learning management system content pages as a way for students to stream it straight from that experience. So they don't, as William was saying, don't make them go to a lot of different places to consume content. Another way to create reusable content is to think through what are some things that I have to explain to students how to do multiple times, and then create one how-to video and reuse it every time you're going to ask them to do that. If it's in chemistry and they're setting up the hood in a specific way for 3 or 4 different reactions, videotape yourself setting up the hood in that way, and then stop after it gets to be a different experience when the experiment's different. But if you're setting things up in the same way, or if you're using a similar environment on your computer, you can create a screencast instead of a regular video. But the idea is to create one how-to video and reuse it, either for students in the same class or even students in different classes if you have students that need to learn how to do something. This can be even more exciting if you work with colleagues. And so asking colleagues to help you create these how-to videos, and you can put them in a pool so that everybody makes fewer of them. Many hands makes light work. Another strategy, and I learned this the hard way, is avoid time-based references. So I thought I was being clever because in my class about how to learn with your mobile device, I talk about how games like Wii and others are also used as learning tools. And so around Thanksgiving time, for a picture of a turkey, I put Wiimotes instead of drumsticks and thought that was very clever. But guess what? The next semester, I couldn't use the slide deck and I couldn't use the recording of my mini lecture because I had made a reference to Thanksgiving and a turkey with a Wiimote drumstick, and that didn't really work for spring break. So I learned my lesson, and we can do that with respect to days, times, holidays, seasons, or current events. So later in this session, I'm going to refer to the open labs that we're going to have in the next couple of weeks, but I'm not going to give specific dates because we can reuse this video for the next time we do this institute, right? Or if you're going to use these recordings as an institute in the box, why would you want me to tell a specific date to visit a specific place when we can make it a little more general and say, refer to the learning management system for more details? So the last thing is to find someone else's reusable content. Places like Merlot, I know we're all fans of that here in the Cal State system because it started with Jerry Hanley and others out of the Chancellor's office. And I think he's at Cal State Long Beach now. There are other repositories and referatories out there like the OER, or Open Educational Resource Commons, Skills Commons, if you're teaching classes that might be more career and technical or education orientation. So go ahead, take a look. Some of those sites like Merlot and others have rating systems, so people who have used the materials can say how valuable they found them. But they're useful for us to find things that we may not have the time to create, like an animation, like an infographic, like a set of discussion prompts. So flexibility strategies for lecturers, period. If you're a fan of the musical Hamilton, and I am not going to sing it, but the room where it happens is the classroom, right? And so we're delivering and recording lectures from a specific space. But imagine a student is using a smartphone to participate in a Zoom lecture or to watch a Zoom recording. Can they read what you're sharing on your screen? The slides, the text on the slides, any websites? Are you blowing up the font size so that people can read it easily? Are you using an application like Excel or Google Spreadsheets? And are you making that 200% instead of 150%? So people looking on a small screen can actually read the text. So strategies for flexibility: give access to the slides, the notes, and the handouts in advance, or right then and there at the beginning. Provide audio descriptions of each screen that you share so that students who are listening to an audio-only version, as I mentioned before, in this module, we talked about students who might be listening to an audio while they're on a bus or riding a bike or washing dishes after they put the kids to bed. So if you have an audio only version, then you may need to describe what's on the screen. And I'll give an example of that in a little bit. And last, make sure you address students in each modality that you're offering. I know that in this group of people, some people are going all high flex, which means you have students who are in the room, students who are real time on a video conference, and students who are asynchronous. But others are just going to do two of those things. You might have real-time students in the classroom and real-time students in the video conference, but maybe no recording. Or you might be a little different. You might have the real-time students in the classroom and the recording, but no video conference in between. Whatever flavor of ice cream you're going to eat, we have ideas for you, but you want to make sure you're addressing students in each of those modalities. So how do we address those needs? Because there's a lot to consider when you're giving a lecture, right? So I already asked, can everybody see the visuals well? Can they read the video conference chat if they don't have a screen in front of them? Am I projecting the chat in the room where they're all sitting? Can everyone hear me? Can they hear students in the classroom who are talking? I know campuses like Chico may be outfitting certain classrooms to have microphones where the students sit, but not every campus is able to do that or has the time or finances. So we need to come up with other strategies. One is the play-by-play announcer strategy, where we just get used to really not only giving our lecture, but providing a lot of running commentary, where we are saying what's on our slides, what's happening in the room, telling students who are maybe going to watch the recording what they should expect, or what, now press pause and go do X. Those are the different aspects of the process that we need to build in. And as we mentioned, when we did that run of show template, we may need to make time and space for that to happen. Another is to crowdsource some of these activities, where you can delegate some of that play-by-play activity by asking students in the classroom or online if they would volunteer to be tech scribes or chat jockeys, which we've talked about before, to type their classmates' questions and comments into the chat so that there's a text-based version of what was spoken out loud. So thinking through some of the ways we can support our students. Then when we think about the visuals themselves from our content, some people have a rule about using 24-point font or larger for presentations so people in the back of the room can read the text. Well, now we're thinking about not just the back of the room, but people who are looking at it on a smartphone or a tablet. The new rule should be to test any lecture visuals by viewing them on a smartphone. And some clever analogies that I'm using here for these visuals help us think through how we can support our students. One, it's happening right now, the simultaneous movie releases. Some mainstream movies are being released to theaters and to streaming services like HBO Max at the same time. So for our flexible course experiences, students in your classroom are in the theater watching the big screen, while remote and asynchronous learners are streaming it to their device. The next is, we haven't been on flights very much lately, at least I haven't, but airplane seat back TVs. Everybody gets to watch their own version of the same video so that we can make it easier for them to see it without having to look over the tall person's head. Or if in the case of the people online, we want them to be able to see the slides without having to project. So using software like Nearpod to allow in-person and remote real-time students to watch the visuals on their own monitors, and allows asynchronous learners to watch the visuals as they watch the recording, and they can input their own responses to quiz questions and polls and other activities. Those are all clever ways to use a tool so that everybody's looking at their screen instead of one big screen in the front. Advanced screening is to borrow from the flipped classroom model and record your lecture ahead of time. Again, we might do this because we want more time for activity, or we might do this so that students watch something before the scheduled class time, and then we can summarize the main points when the class meeting begins and jump into those activities that build on what they should have taken away from that content. And the last is remote control, where you share your slides ahead of time, put a link to them in a video conference chat once everybody's in the room so that students can follow along locally as you present. May make it easy for them to read the text or review complex diagrams or images. In micro lesson 3.3, we talked about the run of show documents again. And if you're using that run of show, have your links ready to copy and paste into the chat, as I've been doing right here during this session. I've got a list of links and I can just pop them in the chat so I don't have to go look for them or assemble them. It just saves time without having to look for the links. When we talk about visual communication, in module 3, we talked about some visual forms of communication, but we'll quickly revisit the scenarios that may emerge during class meetings. Some of you may have American Sign Language interpreters join one of your students or more for live class meetings. So to support them, we want to send the interpreter the slides and other visuals in advance so they can get familiar with the vocabulary. In the video conference environment, you want to use a feature like Spotlight, which is a Zoom feature so the interpreter is always pinned for the student if that student is remote. Similarly, real-time captioners, if you have a student who has requested that accommodation, a student can have not just automated captions, but real-time captioner typing them for higher accuracy. And it's just a couple tweaks in the settings in the video conference. Right now, we are using the auto caption feature here on this video conference tool. They're not consistent enough, I don't believe, for accessibility purposes, but they support English language learners and learners who prefer text for learning. It also is something that can be edited later once the video has been recorded and embedded. Video conference chat, if you don't have a chat jockey, like we discussed in micro lecture 3.3, then you can create regular time slots to check the chat for questions and comments. I did this on Tuesday where I created what I called the mini Q&A, and we just spent 5 minutes for that particular mini lecture answering questions, and allowed me to run through my presentation without worrying about interruptions, because I already have a lot of cognitive load challenges. If you know me at all, that I add to my own cognitive load challenges because of my attention span. So if you think you might forget, add checking for understanding slides that prompt you to pause and check for verbal and chat-based questions. I find that the act of just putting a question mark at the end of something will cause students to switch from passive mode listening to active mode thinking through. And so putting that question on a slide allows you to take a break. Sometimes my strategy is to drink a sip of water so that I take that pause and let them take a couple seconds to do that. Other visual tools that you can bring to bear are polls, like video conferencing polls or Poll Everywhere, basically things that you can load on your device through an app. Reading out the prompt and answer options when you launch a poll so that everybody knows what they're dealing with, and reading the results when you close it. Again, that play-by-play commentary, not assuming that everybody can see the results or the answer options. And then letting asynchronous students know how they can participate in the same poll or an equivalent data collection activity. For annotation, which we're going to try a little bit later today, you can be sure to provide an audio description of any annotations that you and your students are making on the screen. For example, in this diagram of the heart, I'm circling the aorta, which passes over the heart from the left ventricle and runs down in front of the backbone. I'm circling it because today we're discussing aortic stenosis, when the heart's aortic valve narrows, which is the most common form of valvular heart disease in the elderly population. So you can imagine me circling the aorta on a heart diagram, but saying it out loud for those students who can't see it. My mom was a nurse, so I did know about aortic stenosis before this mini lecture. All right, audio. You know the commercial where the guy says, "Can you hear me now?" Well, when you increase flexibility in your course, something as simple as talking can involve problem solving. So let's look at some different audio related scenarios and how to manage them in flexible environments. So I already mentioned the surround sound, where some campuses have put a lot of work and time and effort into building flexible classroom environments. The most tricked out rooms are going to have microphones suspended from the ceiling to capture student questions and comments. And the teacher will probably have a microphone too, such as a lavalier mic that you can clip onto your shirt or your waistband or your jacket pocket, or maybe a wireless handheld mic or a podium mic. The next is the town hall setting, or if you are familiar with daytime talk shows, sometimes they engage with the live audience by walking to audience members with a handheld microphone so that everybody on the television can hear them ask their question or make their comment. So we can do the same thing. If we have wireless handheld mics, just click it on when it's time for students to ask questions. And that way they have time to formulate their question. They ask it in a way that everybody online and in the room can hear. And then you can take the mic back and answer the question or hand it to someone else to answer. It takes more time, but it's a possible way to get through the audio challenges. Echo chambers. In-person students may bring a laptop or smartphone to the classroom. If they log into the video conference, so they can be a chat jockey or something like that, then they can hear the remote students, but that can cause a distraction for other students around them. So you're going to want to ask everybody to mute themselves so you don't create some massive feedback loops in your room. Single points of contact. So you may be the only microphone in the room, or you may have the only microphone in the room, since I don't know if any of you are actually microphones. But if it's a lavalier or wireless mic, then you can move around a little bit. If your laptop is your microphone and you have wireless earbuds like AirPods, then test your range to see how far away from the laptop you can walk before your sound cuts out. Remember, you still have to repeat everything that you're reading on the screen for the people in the room, and everything that people say in the room for the people online, so that you're acting as that translator or intermediary for people in different environments. Another role that you may end up playing is the tethered teacher. Let's say that the only microphone in the room is either your laptop mic, which I have often had to do, or a podium microphone. That means that you're not only the single point of contact, but you're tethered to that space where you can't move around. Some people like to walk around when they lecture or use the board. If you're going to write on the board, then you're going to have to stop talking. The last is the masked teacher, and this is not the same as the masked singer, but it could be as fun if you wish. But I know that while we are in an upward trend for the coronavirus and everything, there are more variants out there that are emerging. So unless you want to wear a giant school mascot costume and play like you are the masked teacher, you may have to wear a face mask for safety purposes while teaching somewhere down the road. Even though the state's opening up right now, we don't know what the future's like. So some things to think about. Studies have shown that surgical masks hinder speech recognition the least of any of the masks that we wear on our face. Consider a mask with a see-through panel for your mouth, especially if you're teaching language or have students who are deaf or hard of hearing. And then last, if you can reduce background noise that competes with what you're saying by either closing doors to loud hallways in the in-person classroom, muting the speakers on your computer so that noises happening on the web don't interfere. All those things are good strategies. And I see Dennis talks about muting the microphone and speaker if in the room. Barbara talks about testing for classrooms, and she's got a rechargeable amplifier microphone that sits on the waistband. And Lalita shared the Notability app for writing, marking, and annotations on PDFs. So awesome. Thank you all for sharing those additional great points. And we will save the chat so that we capture those and think about that. Couple more slides here. Accessibility. So I usually break it down to 7 or 8 major things to think about when it comes to basic accessibility principles, but you can put those in some boxes, literally, as I've done on this screen, and get it down to 4, where you combine some of them. So accessibility, the main points for things like documents or presentations, and in some cases, spreadsheets. This list will expand when you get to things like PDF files and such. Text formatting. Use heading styles and the list formatting tools. I know a lot of us just like to type 1, 2, 3 for a numbered list, but if you click the little button that's got the numbers on it so that it creates an actual numbered list, that supports students who use screen readers. Descriptive text. If you use images on your presentations or your visuals or your website, the content pages in the learning management system, you're going to want to use alternative text for those images so that students with screen readers know what the image is displaying. And then descriptive links, which I described earlier, are a way to make sure that we are giving students information about the context. What's going to happen when I click this link? How many of you, raise your hand or use the yes or no in the chat, have gone to a website where they've got a bullet list, and at the end of each item, it just says, click here, click here, click here. And when you hit a list of click here, click here, click here, with a screen reader, that's all it will read, because they can jump from link to link if they're using a screen reader. And it doesn't help, because everybody knows that when you click here, something's going to happen, but what? So instead, I like an action verb: review the article titled X, or visit website titled Y. So that way they know exactly what's going to happen when they click the link. And Lalita brings up changing the background of the slide. So that gets us to the third of our items on this slide here: accessibility through color. So we need to make sure that the contrast is really high. Usually needs to be a 75% contrast between the text on the page and the background color. Black and white is obviously 100% contrast. But if you have black on a pale gray or white on a charcoal or a navy blue, those are going to be 75%. It's when you get the lemon yellow on the powder blue that nobody's going to be able to read it. And so you want to make sure you have a high contrast, and there are tools you can use to check that. Also, make sure that you use non-color methods to make a point. You can use color, like a lot of people use red text to show that something's important. Well, that doesn't help someone who may have color blindness. And so instead, you can use red text and bold, or red text and italics, or red text and underline, so that they know it's important and should consider it more than anything else. Last but not least, if you're using tables on your content pages in your course or in your slides or on a document, use what are called header rows, which the screen readers will read to help students make sense of what's in the rows below the header. At some point, we can only hold so much in our memory banks. And if you have a big table with a lot of information, it can be really hard for students to understand what's going on. So that brings us to our last set of activities. We're going to consider startup and shutdown checklists for when we enter classrooms, especially when it comes to reusable content. We're going to think about how we deliver lectures in flexible environments, and we're going to think about accessibility checklists for ourselves. So I'm going to pop those in the chat for you all. And I'm going to run to those right now to make sure that they're editable. Okay, so they're now all editable. I'll give you all maybe 3 or 4 minutes to check it out. And then we are going to save the last 5 minutes for what I call module Flex YZ, a way to sum it all up.
Kevin, one question.
Please go ahead.
Usually, I would not know if there is any student in my class who has a disability until the school starts. So in advance, I don't know how to do it in advance, many things.
So is your question?
My question is like, I can certainly look into making it more accessible, but if there is a very specific type of accommodation is needed, I would not know that until the school starts.
That is correct. So that's why it's advantageous to use the tools like Leslie pointed out, the Ally, to check our materials to see if they are accessible and to follow those general principles that I gave, those 7 practices, so that we have less to do when someone enters our class that may need an accommodation. And then again, it could be a case where you end up having to work with the disability programs and resource center on your campus so that you are creating the accommodations on the fly. The more you can do in advance, the easier it is for the student, because imagine if you had to wait 2 weeks to get a transcription of some video that you've been using in your class. And so it's just thinking ahead through the types of accommodations that might be needed and having them ready. And in some cases, it's very difficult, as you mentioned. And so we have to be aware of it, take action when we can, and then evaluate how well it went and keep moving forward. And luckily, we don't have to do this ourselves. So this whole concept of thinking through accessibility, you could have someone from the Disability Programs and Resource Center, or maybe a student who uses a screen reader, go through your course environment before the semester begins, just as a way to check it, to see where are the biggest barriers, and you can start working on those before students get there. And the nice thing is Microsoft itself showed in its research that the accommodations we make for students with disabilities actually help over 65% of the population. So when we caption videos, it doesn't just help students who are deaf and hard of hearing, it also helps English language learners. It helps people who prefer to read text instead of listen to audio. It helps people who may be in a situation where they don't have their earbuds, but want to watch a lecture and they don't want to disturb everybody on the bus or everybody in the room where they are in the library, so they can watch the video and read the text because they forgot their earbuds. So, and that's just one example. Right. It's the same guide. Dennis brings it up. You beat me to it, Dennis. Universal design is basically just that. You're providing multiple pathways for students to succeed.
Yes.
But it's a great question. It's one that we all have to address, right?
Nowadays, Fresno State has started doing the person from our disabilities office, they enroll in my class. just so to make sure that the student has access to everything, and then they make sure that everything is done.
Okay, that's
So that is
handy.
from administration point of view. So just in case, putting that out.
And I know those offices are smaller in some campuses than others. They have fewer staff. So again, the more you can do in advance, you can take advantage of their time. One of the things that we've been looking at in the plans at the end of each module, and I'll remind you again in just a second, is to consider who on your campus can help you with some of these activities. All right, so I'm going to ask everybody to wrap it up. And as you do that, I'm going to quit this recording so that we can do a quick summary of the Institute.